Another sip of Romulan ale.
Stevie Ray Vaughan did not use the TS-808 Tubescreamer. He did, in fact, use a 1985 TS9. I didn't know that, did you? Also, some famous, amazing person was born in 1985. Who was it? Not so much famous, it was me. Anyway, I'm Hello Sailor Joe for the Pedal Dive podcast. And my co-host today is...
John Mulholland, Space Wolf.
And our awesome, amazing guest today taught me almost everything I know about pedals. I'm over egging the pudding there. Is...
Hi, I'm Simon from JSA Effect Pedals.
There you go. Right, apologies to everyone who was waiting for this to go live. It was, in fact, started and we were talking about pedals and it was all going, and then I realised that I hadn't pressed live properly, so apologies for that. So my surprise... I know we haven't had one without a technical problem yet, so why start now? Right. I did throw in a little surprise for the boys here, but they've had some chance to think about it now that I've messed it up. But I want to throw in one use and famous person of a Tubescreamer and how they used it and why we admired it. And like I said before, which used in here because I didn't press live, my choice would be Lee Mallier in his metal tones, because he used the Tubescreamer to put back in what the amp takes out. And I just thought that was a real cool way of using it. Now, over to you, John.
Like I was saying before, Joe, the Tubescreamer, it was ubiquitous in the 80s. So it's kind of hard. A lot of times, I mean, you know, you just saw that green pedal on the board. It was there. And so to try and pick one, you did put me on the spot. I mean, most recently, the stuff that Brad Paisley does with the Tubescreamer circuitry, I just love his tone. Like one of the modern players, I mean,
yeah,
he makes the Tubescreamer, like, you know, sing.
And now, Simon, what about you?
Yeah. It's a weird one because I was a singer-songwriter for a long time, so I'm a massive John Mayer fan. But I was a big John Mayer fan for like his early stuff and as a songwriter. And then as I got into pedals and obviously his dirtier guitar tones, realizing that was a Tubescreamer. And again, it varies between albums, between like a Tubescreamer, a Blues Baker, and a Klon. But the John Mayer Tubescreamer is the big thing for me. And his big thing, again, he talks about it, saying that he feels like you can't play a Strat without a Tubescreamer because, as you said, Joe, it's got that kind of mid-hump, so it's filling back in. A lot of amps naturally have that scoop. So it just thickens everything up, especially on single coils.
Did you, speaking of John Mayer, did you watch the TPS live stream today? I'm a massive fan, like I watch it every week, but they were actually talking about Sob Rock. Do you like the album or not?
So I've not, it's weird. It's not that I stopped listening to John Mayer after Continuum, but I fell in love with John Mayer for Inside Once Out, which was an EP that he did before Room for Squares. So those first two albums I fell in love with. And I'm slowly making my way through, but I only bought Continuum 2 years ago. And I think I've got a copy of Born and Raised as well. But you know, I'll get there. I'll get to Sob Rock at some point. But I love the singles that I've heard of it are great. And it's all the thing with John Mayer is it's all tongue in cheek. You always have to. He's never taken himself seriously. So all the 80s stuff. He kind of said like the whole album is written. That songs you thought were written in the 80s, but they weren't. They're just him.
I love stuff like that.
Yeah. So I'm going to dive right into this circuit because this is a big one. Me and John talked for an hour and a half about the Tubescreamer, which has got approximately no components. So
the fuzz right.
Oh, and the fuzz right. So basically, we aim for an hour, and so far we haven't achieved less than 1.5. Well, there you go. Maybe this one will be a bit better. Now, I've basically the circuit drawings I've took completely from Electro Smash. Do you guys use that? Is it Electro Smash the website that is like breakdowns of circuits and whatnot?
Yeah, so I ended up. I'm a massive nerd, so I did end up drawing one out.
Oh yes.
Partly because Electro Smash get it wrong, and partly because there's a
really?
point where electric
Yeah.
R11, there's two R11s in the schematic.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
that's
they're missing an input resistor, and yeah, there's two R11s, and there's a resistor before the second half of the dual op amp that should be like with a star, because it's not in all of them. It's in some of the units, but not most of them.
That's fantastic.
That's a good point to bring up too, Simon, because I found the same thing. Like a lot of schematics that are in forums and on all these different places are wrong. When I built my harmonic percolator, to get it to actually do the things that you want a harmonic percolator to do, I had to take things from 5 different schematics and just use my skills to blend it into the circuit that I came up with that actually works. So
well, look at that fuzz rate from last week. We had that wrong for most of it.
Oh yeah.
Well,
we found out there were errors.
The blues breaker is the epitome of the internet got it wrong. There's I forget the guy's actual name, but Tone Geek was doing a big thing where he's making a blues breaker PCB for the original V1.
Yeah.
And there's schematic you find online. There's a couple, and it's the gain stage. So it's got 2 gain filters. And it's fancy, and the original drawing, or the one that kind of everyone copied, is wrong. So it's got more gain, it's much brighter, and it's much, it doesn't sound like the original unit. And yeah, for years there's been so not every, but the majority of big blues breaker clones out there have used that schematic, and it's wrong in terms of the kind of made in England V1 big black box versions. And
it's the little details that count for me. I'm sure John's the same there.
Agree 100%. It's the little nuances that make it right. And the way I look at schematics, even if they are correct, is they're the starting point, because every component, that you work with, especially when you're working with like transistors, they are very temperamental to different, voltages and things. And sometimes, one transistor works better, like we discussed in the fuzz face, at a certain voltage range than another one does. So it's really just like your starting point, and everything else, figure it out from there.
Gotta love this from Cathal Dress Rehearsal. It really was, mate.
It really was.
Mate, the first intro was almost the best song in the world.
Too bad we didn't hit record.
I know. It was just class. Well, so if we get straight into this circuit, then the first bit I'd like to bring up is the input. Let me see. So if I can remember how to get it, do you know what? I shouldn't be in charge of this sort of thing. I know. There you go. How's that?
Let's have a look. Okay, I've got it. It's the wrong way around there. Yeah. But so C1 should be the other side of R1 normally. And it's, I appreciate they've drawn it like that because they've not. Where's the? Oh, the switching is a bit after, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
The ones I've modified. The ones I've modified have all had R1 before it.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It's for the most part, it's a really standard, very simple transistor buffer. Buffers are a weird one because we get into lots of conversation about this. Do we need them? Especially input buffers. Are they a throwback from, like on this, where it's got the flip-flop switching? Is it just a throwback to that? There's lots of debates about that, which will take too long for this. But
what's your thoughts, though? Which way would you prefer it?
I'm a big fan of buffers. If a circuit has buffers in and you're making a clone, I feel like it should have the buffers in. I also feel like there's circuits where adding or removing the buffers can help as well. So I'm very much case to case with it. The RAT's a great example. The output, so obviously the RAT is just an op amp clipping and then the tone control, then a JFET buffer on the output. If you've ever built a RAT without that output buffer and replaced it with like a change the tone pot slightly, it sounds completely different. That op amps, everything smashing that buffer makes a difference. In the same way, if you change that buffer transistor, it makes a difference.
Do you have a preference
for this or just in general?
Yeah, well, for this specific, for the Tubescreamer. Not that I'm trying to steal your ideas or anything.
No, sorry. The Tubescreamer is a weird one again because this comes up in conversation a lot. How do you do the input buffer? So this is just a BJT transistor, and it's set so that the outputs come off the emitter, so it's not inverting. For those that don't know, if you make something like an LPB1 or Electra and the output's coming off the collector, it flips the polarity of the signal, so it puts 108 degrees out of phase. The idea of a buffer or a unity gain buffer is that it's keeping the exact volume the same, but the impedance, so here the impedance at R1, well, the impedance at C1 and the impedance on the output of C2 are different. The impedance of the output of C2 is considerably lower than the impedance around C1. And it was designed because if you just had your guitar going straight into that as a pedal, like I'm sure you've talked about with fuzz faces and other kind of 2 transistor fuzzes, the guitar pickup impedance is anywhere between 500 kilo ohms or 1 meg, depending on the type of pickup. And a lot of circuits, outside of the fuzz faces, which were designed to work with that, a lot of things aren't. So the buffer, takes that kind of, say you've got 1 meg input and brings it down to about 10k at the output, and you get a much more, so whatever guitar you plug in, input hitting the impedance input hitting the next stage, which is the op amp, will be exactly the same. There's no variation. That's what the buffer is doing.
And that also leads to like the whole Strat thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like, because single coils will have a higher impedance because it's just a single magnet and there's no kind of witchcraft to it. And yeah, but again, there comes up in conversation now because we're in an age where most of us have multiple pedals on the board. We're not just using one pedal with a guitar straight into it. So chances are, if you've got a Tubescreamer on your board now, the guitar probably isn't hitting it straight away. There's probably something else in the way. So it's never going to see that kind of 1 meg or 500k input impedance. It's probably going to see a low 10, somewhere between 110 kilo ohms impedance. So the buffer is kind of redundant because what's going to hit the op amp is at the right kind of impedance.
Yeah. So when it comes to this input stage, I'll throw this out to both of you. When you're building a circuit, is there any mods or any changes that you like to do specifically, or is it kind of play by ear or leave it the same? How do you approach it?
The biggest thing is just what type of buffer, really. So BJT buffer can handle lower input impedance. So again, if it's being hit with something that's already at kind of a 10 kilo ohm input impedance, it's fine with it. You can replace it with a JFET buffer, but a JFET will expect a much higher input impedance and is slightly fussier if you feed it a lower input impedance. And you can replace it with an op amp. So the Maxon OD808, which is kind of the precursor to the Tubescreamer, uses an op amp stage there. And again, it can handle a wider range of input impedances, but it also sounds slightly different. And there's always an argument, like the plumb buffer comes up a lot with that. The argument that it's a sterile sounding buffer. I don't agree with that. Again, I feel like it's horses for courses, and whatever sounds right with the rest of the circuit sounds right. But so yeah, the mods really. Yeah, I like the plumb buffer. The mods we'll come to in a bit because C2 is one of my big mods, but you need the next section as well to fully appreciate what it's doing.
I'd like to say that's one of my mods as well, but I actually stole it from you, so I don't think Well, what about you, John? How do you approach have you built many Tubescreamers? How do you approach this beginning stage?
I've only built a couple, really, to tell you the truth. And this is like one of the first boards that I did. I've got it mounted in a little prototyping rig now so that I can go play with the mods that Simon's going to suggest in this live stream. And this is one that has some modding capability built into it. It's got, let's see if I can get it closer.
I'm squinty.
Yeah, it's one of the circuit boards that General Guitar Gadgets sells, and it has that input buffer built into it. But it also has a lot of places built in for you to do the different modifications, like different clipping diode switching, the AMZ FAT mod, all the Keeley mods, and that kind of thing. So it's a pretty cool, like, board if you don't want to try and lay something out that's really complicated. I think Joe said he burned one of them up trying to build one. He like left the iron on it for too long and actually peeled the traces off of it. But
I've just done that on a video for YouTube. Literally, I filmed it. I filmed the video of the weekend. I think it's like 2 weeks away from happening. In fact, yeah, no, it is. It's 2 weeks away. It was C1. I was taking C1 home and replacing it with a switch, and I lifted the trace right off.
Man, they've gotten smaller and smaller in their thickness. It is, yeah. This one on the prototyping rig is one that I actually just took the graphic off of. I took the graphic off of the General Guitar Gadgets website and then just made a. I don't think I have one really handy, but I made a transparency and then did a positive on a photoresist circuit board and burned a bunch of them. But it's kind of a pain in the butt, and like sometimes if your traces aren't exactly right, you got to go in and fix things. And so I just bought one from JD Sleep, and it worked right out of the bat. So for what they cost, I mean, it's hard to go wrong. $15 for a board that I know is going to be right, and I can just drop it in after I put all my components in.
Exactly that. We've got some messages in the chat. So King of Blues pedal, many people use that. Tubescreamer side of that, Cathal saying, and he also uses Simon's a lot. I've not actually used them before.
Yeah, that King of Blues pedal is a double pedal, and it's got a Tubescreamer on one side.
It's not. It's a clon. It's a clon on one side and a blues breaker on the other.
Blues breaker on the other.
All right. Oh, that's a pretty cool pedal.
It's weird because it's sold at people again because you see the name and people assume it was a King of Tone clone.
King of Tone, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was what it was when I bought, assuming it was, and I opened it up to have a look. And there was a pair of Germanium diodes and the weird dual gang game control and the massive charge pump. Like, oh, this is another clon with clon one side, two from the other.
Yeah. I remember you going through all this. This must have been a few years ago. You went through all of them dual pedals or the Tone King pedals.
I went through a kind of early on when I started building it. I realized, like you were saying, it's like $15 or $15 for a PCB. So if you're then gonna have to build and find the enclosure, knobs, all this kind of stuff, it's very quickly getting $30-40 for a pedal to build from scratch. Or if it's a pedal you don't know if you're gonna like it, it's like 15 quid to buy the cheap OEM Chinese clone. And if you liked it, then do something with it. But yeah, I found it was cheaper to buy those Chinese pedals to see if I liked the circuit and then go from there. So yeah, I've got. There was a point where I had the entire Mosky collection.
I'm the crusty old. I'm the crusty old guy here. Those cheap Chinese pedals didn't exist when I started trying to get into this. I just had to say, hey, I like the way that sounds. I'll just put it on a board and see what happens.
Yeah,
I've got a whole bunch of abortions over here too, so don't worry. There's like circuit boards boards littering the place that are like halfway. It's like, nah, it didn't work. It's like I'm not even going to try and take the components.
I keep saying I'm going to throw them away or strip them down. I never do. They just sit there taunting me.
Exactly. They're just like those.
And you actually alluded to the next bit, Simon, on when you said the C2. So do you want to let the people know what exactly you do with C2?
So if you bring up the first op amp stage to the clipping stage, and then it will make a bit more sense because
let's see, this is the clipping stage then.
Yeah, there you go, perfect. So C2, so we talk about caps in the signal path, and depending on where you learn electronics / who you talk to, capacitors directly in the signal path are either called coupling capacitors or decoupling, depending on who you are. I think of them as decoupling. I think it's decoupling because that's the point. Is it's separating the parts. It's separating them into individual units. Coupling, but yeah, I suppose coupling because they're connecting separate carriages.
Well, I'm a mechanical engineer, and you couple two parts together. So I'm going to go with coupling.
Okay, we're going to coupling. It's easy. Yeah, no, it's easier to say as well. So a lot of there's lots of caps in the signal path and Tubescreamer when you put the buffers in, and all these coupling caps. There was a guy, I don't know what the guy's name was now. I meant to search it earlier, but I completely forgot. A guy did what he called the SRV special mod, and he went through a Tubescreamer and basically took out as much as he could in the signal path to try and make it cleaner and more open. And he realized if you remove C2 and R, is it R5? Again, squinty. That resistor that goes from the non-inverting input to VREF. Anyway, you can remove those two components and it directly couples the input buffer to that stage. And for me, the very first time I did, because he then goes through and does it for the whole rest of the circuit, which we'll talk about as we go through, but that was a massive revelation for me, that idea that you didn't always need coupling capacitors between every section. Now, don't get me wrong, some pedals you do. There are very much pedals that literally do not work if you take the coupling caps out. But I was surprised how many you could remove the coupling caps from. So I jokingly call it SRVing all the time. So anytime I've got a circuit, it's a big circuit, I go through and it's like, how many things can I remove from it? Well, before it stops working, basically. And the result... Sorry.
No, go on. I thought you...
I was just
going
to say, the result in the end tone ends up being much more open, which kind of makes sense.
That's what I was just about to say.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, this has come up with I was chatting to Mark from SoundLad, Liverpool, great guy, again, very knowledgeable. And he goes on about this all the time. He makes a lot of SMD build circuits, but always uses through-hole capacitors. And his big thing was those through-hole capacitors make a massive difference to the sound and the overall feel, and again, tolerance, everything about it. And it's not just the capacitors; it's the materials they use for capacitors, whether it's like polystyrene, the aluminium film, side effects, whatever you're using. Those different materials also make a massive difference. Being able to remove stuff to make the circuit as clean as possible, for me, that's kind of what I've built most of my kind of pedal building stuff around, is trying to make things as open and glorious as possible, and removing parts. You know, the 8 out of 10 times it works, it sounds great. Those 2 out of 10 times it works, it completely kills the circuit. But
I remember first A being the SRV one that I built next to an actual Tubescreamer, and I couldn't believe the difference. It was like a different pedal.
Completely different pedal.
More open is how I would exactly how I would describe it.
Yeah,
and I think actually these 1UF caps, because there's 2 of them in it. These 1UF caps are the main reason that it feels more open. Got a comment in the chat here, and I think I know what pedal this is. This is from Demon FX. It's got a little switch on it that takes it from 808 to TS9. I've modded hundreds of these, just by changing the clipping diodes or these 1UF caps for different values and stuff. They're another one, along with the Joyo. They're really well-made pedals for next to no money at all. It's insane.
Oh, do you leave the switch? Do you leave the toggle switches TS8, 08, and TS9?
I do.
Or do you just fix it? Okay.
Yeah, I just changed like the diodes and just fit them on a switch, so you'd have like an extra. Yeah. With regard to diodes, I've got a question. I've been dying to ask you this actually, and I even bring it up in my my next YouTube video that I was going to ask you. The diodes in this are both set symmetrically. Now, the circuits I've seen online, half of them have them like this, and half of them have them both on the same side, asymmetric. So you have 2 MA150s one side, clipping one half the signal. How do you set them, and what is the reason behind your choice?
I think does that work? Doesn't that? So if you only have one diode, it gates half the signal, because only half the signal is being let through. Like, do you remember? I won't say the full name. I won't say the offensive name for it. I got a pedal that I ended up having to rename the pedal that must not be named. And I tried using a single LED as this kind of soft clipping, and it gates it. Like, you lose half the signal. So with these kind of with MA1, with silicon diodes, these kind of normal silicon diodes, as far as I'm aware, have to be anti-parallel. However, Zener diodes are the opposite. Zener diodes have to be in series but facing the other way. That's the only time I've seen it where it'll be 2 on one side and nothing on the other.
Oh wow! No, I've definitely used them clipping one side. Maybe it's deleting half of the signal, and that's what the sound changes.
Mate, I
No.
don't know. Yeah, I've never seen it with just normal silicon
I'll
diodes.
I'll send you the sound clip after this.
Yeah, yeah.
I've got it. Yeah, it's a different thing. I mean, the two switching options I like really for the Tubescreamer, no diodes, absolute favorite, and then asymmetrical with 1N 4007s. You know, the power diodes, two
Yeah.
on one side, one
Yeah.
on the other.
Yeah. Now I have
Either of them.
I have seen what you're talking about, Joe, on like a transistor pedal where they made a really simple fuzz pedal with a single transistor and a single diode, and the diode was used to like create clipping, but it's also taking part in the transistor's diode network. So you're getting you're clipping based off of what the transistor's doing in that. So if you're using a single diode, it has to have another diode in the circuit somewhere that you're not really seeing on the schematic. It's inside of the integrated component is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
So that's why you can
I'm
get away
guessing you're
with it.
talking about the bass fuzz, where it's like the single transistor,
Yeah,
then a diode
yeah.
with feedback with it. Yeah, and so it's using that diode instead of a feedback resistor, and it's ultra gated intentionally. And again, if you change the forward voltage, so you change that diode and you change the forward voltage, it becomes more and more gated.
You can do that with the you can do that with the 100K resistor on a fuzz face. Switch your diode in there, so then your feedback loop is goes through the diode.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you're talking about the weird rectifier diode. So MA150s, which are my favorite Tubescreamer diodes. They were like the original JSA Effect diodes. But they sound terrible in a lot of other places. I've said this before a lot, and it's part of my. I don't believe in magic components. I believe in the right components for the right circuit, and it just so happens MA150s in a Tubescreamer sound phenomenal. But there's something about that roundness that sounds great. But yeah, in other places sound bad. But to try and if you can't get hold of them or you don't want to, because they're about £1, probably about 150 each now, and hard to find.
Yeah, it's about the right.
Yeah, you can simulate it with a 1N4001 and a kind of 1N germanium in series to like a 1N34A.
Oh, cool.
So you put those in series and you get a similar kind of forward voltage drop and feel to the MA150s. So again, I've seen that a lot where sort of be 4 diodes, but it's kind of adding up the same forward voltage drop as the MA150s.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. I wish I hadn't paid out for the ones that I've just recently bought. And another thing I've done to a few Tubescreamers, and certainly will be doing on the ones that I'm on these days, is C4, the pass filter, the 51PF. You can add that on a switch, and that kind of rounds off the tone as well. So if you take that out of the circuit, it's a much more abrupt sound, if it were.
Yeah. Well, so C4 is an interesting one because it's one of those things where every time I share like a layout or thing, I always talk about that and changing it. And it's a weird one because it's reacting. It's there to cut down the harmonics created from distortion. Really, that's why it's such a small value. Because we forget that. Well, no, we don't forget. When we create distortion, we are literally creating more harmonics. So we're making literally more sound. Physically, there is more sound. But obviously, they're at much higher frequencies because they're relative to whatever frequency you're putting in. So it's going to be doubles and doubles, doubles. So that very small cap is just taming all of that kind of extra high, those extra high harmonics which are being created by distortion. If you can also be using the same if you didn't have the diodes and you made the gain an insane amount. Again, it will then help to stop it oscillating because, again, the amount of extra sound being created, being fed back round, turns it up so much that you can start to kind of motivate and oscillate. So C4 is one of those caps where you'll see it in almost any op-amp based circuit. There will be a cap like that somewhere, and it's either going to be that small and it's just kind of taming super high frequency harmonics created from distortion, or it might be bigger and there's like an intentional tone shaping thing where, that might be 1NF to try and cut down a lot of the treble and bring those mids forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I my latest build, I put that on a switch. So you got three different. It kind of, in fact, it's right in front of me. I'm talking about it. So it's like got three switches. You got the input cap, clipping diodes, and that C5 on a switch.
Yeah.
I tell you what, recently I've been modding things like I modded the TC Electronics Mojo, and I've done a few Boss pedals. And the PCBs on them Mojos are amazing, even though it's like half and half through hole and SMD. And the Boss pedals, it's been amazing. And that's why when I come to do this Tubescreamer, this is the one I messed up the input cap on. I was like, oh my God, I literally burned the trace out and everything because the circuit's just
one of the
made like a...
Yeah, the Joyo one. Oh, yeah, the traces are terrible, and the wire that goes between the foot switch.
Oh God.
Yeah, as you said, you literally need to glue it down with hot glue or something before you even start touching it.
I tape it off as well, hot glue.
Yeah.
And then when that's done, I put some tape over it.
When I saw Joe doing one of those mods, I thought it was cordage. I didn't think it was wire. I literally thought that was wax cord. I was like, what kind of... I was just like...
Yeah.
I can't even tell you how many of them I've pulled out.
Yeah, it is on every Joyo pedal. So like that, the Ultimate Drive, the Vintage Overdrive. And there's something else I modded. But yeah, all of them have that wire, that horrible,
I did
horrible
the tremolo recently with a 5 Cats pedals mod kit.
Yeah.
And that was the same.
Yeah.
And what about...
I was going to say,
go on, mate.
Sorry. I was going to say,
to me, to you.
Well, I was going to say this whole section is like the big. There's two things that kind of define a Tubescreamer: this section and the tone stage. And so when it comes to mods, those are like the two main places to go, really. So, the C3 and R4 network, which I feel like has a better name, but I always refer to it as a gain filter because it's kind of it. Those two and R6 are the big things I attack. So R6 is your minimum gain. So obviously when the 500k log is fully left, you've still got R6 in the series. So you've then got 51k permanently fixed. So that's going to be your minimum amount of gain. So if you make that smaller, it will clean up better. So I tend to go quite low. I tend to go to...
I've never thought of modding that. Look at that.
Maybe
I've
not.
got to well to this.
That's actually one of the classic Keeley mods is to do that too, is to replace R6 with like a half value.
Yeah, you go
2K,
2K.
I tend to go for so I'm a low gain kid, so I go for 4K7, so that it's kind of the gain starts at 2, and it's really clean, and that first part of the sweep is totally clean. But the downside of that is you then lose some output volume because that's obviously that being at 51k means you've got a decent amount of amplification, well, about 10, about 11 even. So you've got a decent amount of output. Making that smaller will drop the output, but it does clean it up a lot.
The distortion pot. So on the SRV mod, that goes up to 1 meg. Is that something you would do?
So I don't do that. There's a couple of reasons. One, because when you're like, say with the Joyo pedal, it's easier to mod the values than it is to try and change the pots. Because Christ, those kind of horrible
that thing was not fun.
Horrible. No, they're a mess.
Yeah, them little,
yeah. So for those,
I actually say in the video for that, I actually say I don't normally add the 1 meg pot because A, it's a pain in the arse, and B, I never have the gain up that high anyway. But I did do it just for the video.
For those that don't know, and again, the gain count. So this is a non-inverting op-amp stage, and the gain calculation works that it's R6 plus the distortion pot. So it's that resistance divided by R4. So when you've got the gain full, you've got 500k from the pot in series with 51k, so you've got 551k gain, and that's divided by 4k7. So that gives you, I think it's about 200 or something. I can't be asked to do maths in my head. And then when it's the other way,
in the last year, so
when you put the pot the other way, it's only at 51 in series, so that's your minimum gain, and it's 51 over 4k7, and it's that plus 1. So if you wanted the equivalent. So if you wanted to, rather than changing that 500k and make it 1 meg, you could change R4. So you could half the value of R4, which would then give you the same gain calculation. So rather than being 1 meg divided by 4k7, you could do 500 divided by 2k2. The danger of doing that is it then changes. So as I said, R4 and C3 create a high pass filter. So if you make R4 smaller, you also chop more bass. So you would then have to increase C3. But again, it's nice and easy because you just do it as doubles.
So some comments in the chat literally describe what I'm experiencing right now. And I said I would. It's like listening to the master at work.
I got gears turning like crazy. I'm pulling out all my different schematics and looking at them like, oh, where can I do this now? And
I can see the cogs turning in John's head there.
I think there's going to be a lot of the video where I'm like over here looking at, yeah, there it is. Okay.
Up until he started doing maths, I've been like, why did I make
this? I will say this. So when it comes to this, what I was talking to John about the other day is my simple screamer, which became my mega screamer, and the point of that was to use off-the-shelf values. And maths, yes, hate it. No, that's not true. I love maths. That's not a joke. I genuinely love maths. I was going to say. In pedal maths, there's just a lot of doubling and halving. If you half the value of half the value of R4, you double the value of C3, and you get exactly the same roll-off. So again, if you make that 2K2, if you made R4 2K2, you can make C3 100N, and suddenly you've got exactly the same bass response, but with twice the amount of gain.
Huh. That's cool.
That's something I found in my I found in my harmonic percolator experiments was changing those values, like you said, Simon. In those areas, I was able to get massive amounts of volume, whereas the circuit was choked in all the other schematics that I'd tried to build out of it. And I started figuring out, oh, okay, if I do this, then I can open this up, and suddenly I could use half the value of the input voltage resistor, and it just like doubled in volume perceived anyway. So
class.
Yeah, the only problem I ever have is when people start asking. So I'll talk about that, and then people go, "What's the dB difference?" And I don't know if either of you ever looked at it, but decibel maths is horrible because it's logarithmic and it's weird and it doesn't make sense.
Doesn't.
But yeah,
I've got a real rubbish engineering degree that the Navy give me, and we have to do all the maths behind that. Whenever you're going to use that on a warship, I don't know. Or like the bending moment of the spar. Like who cares? But they make you learn all of that, and it's like learn the process, do it, and then forget it. Yeah, you don't need that. While we're on the clipping stage, of course, the op amp comes into play, and I've got to ask the question, but I'll go first. And the internet can hate me for it; they can hate me, and this is going to be no doubt a short. But the TL072 is the best op amp for the Tubescreamer, and if they cost £30 per op amp, they'd be revered. Everyone would love them, but because they're cheap, no one wants them. That's my 50p. Now, hate away.
Have you ever tried the JRC 072D?
No, but I'm going to write that down right now.
It's a great one.
Yeah, so it's the TL072, but made in Japan by the guys, I forget what the company is, but the people that made the 4558s originally.
Yeah.
And obviously D is their suffix, is not highest gain, but like medium gain. So the old Blues Breakers used a weird TL072, and they were hard to find. And somebody suggested it. I think it might be an Adam from AV Pedals suggested it. And yeah, there is the JRC 072D is like the hench version of the TL072.
I mean, you can definitely hear the difference. People say you can't. I mean, it's less prevalent in something that's soft clipping compared to hard clipping. Completely agree with that. But there is a difference. And some people say, no, there isn't. But then they're playing at bedroom levels at home. And fine. But you get a tube amp up the upper register, you know what I mean? You get the volume on there. Fortunate enough on board the warship, I could turn up as much as I like. And testing pedals at that volume, well, no wife at sea, you know what I mean? No kids, you can get it up there. You can hear every little nuance. So yeah, there's definitely a difference. And I found that the TL072 90% of the time, I preferred it to the 4588, 4558. Sorry.
Yeah,
There
I
we
think
go with my
it depends a lot. Yeah, it just depends on what you're trying to go for. So if you're doing the SRV mods and you want it to be more open, yeah, the CL072 does that. If you want that kind of quite thick, gooey kind of Tubescreamer mid, the 4558 double D suffix, so not just a single D, double D, the higher gain version, and has a much fuller low mids. If you want it to be more compressed, you've got the 4580, which is what they use in the King of Tones, which again gives you like a really quite tight but quite compressed sound. I've just built a weird, so I built it as a 1-to-1 and then realized I hated it, so modified it. But the vintage spec Maxon 808, and that uses old Motorola LM1458s, which are like dirt cheap. Like again, they were kind of like dog shit op amps at the time. That's all I could get. So there's something about it. It's that kind of grit that, yeah, it's just kind of, it's indefinable. But again, a lot of these things, and this comes up when people talk about listening to op amps on YouTube, is so much of it's a feel thing. They might sound, you could argue they sound the same, but if you're playing it and you're the person with, you're connected to it, you can feel that difference. And it's how kind of guitar swings back at you, or how full it feels, and when it hits you, it's, yeah.
Yep.
There's at least 100 people listening to this going, nothing matters for the tone, only the pickups.
Oh,
come on.
Well, the player is the most important thing, really.
Yeah.
To tell you the truth, the player is the most important thing. Like, because Jimi Hendrix sounded like Jimi Hendrix no matter what he was playing.
Well, he played a flying V at one point, still Hendrix.
It's still Hendrix. He played an acoustic. He played an acoustic 12-string, and it sounded like Hendrix on a recording that I've got. So,
my thing is, if you can feel a difference in yourself, that makes it real. Because if I perceive it to be real, it's real. And if I perceive it to sound better, I feel better, which means I feel better when we're playing. I'm more relaxed, more adventurous. And I'm talking about someone who can actually play, not me. But you know what I mean? The connection's there. Your playing is different. And you better believe that the audience can tell a difference in your playing. So if that is the difference between them, then it is. You know, I get it a lot where people say, why are you putting a tag board in a pedal with all these big whatever? Just, you can get one for half the price for, I had someone comment on my multi-effects pedal video telling me I was wasting my time and it's only 4 effects pedals in one thing. Someone will just buy a new multi-effects pedal. Like,
that's good for them.
You're on the wrong channel.
Yeah. I mean,
it's just not.
You're not doing it for mass marketing. That's for sure. I mean, it's not something you're going to build millions of. So,
but I just like to. I'll be honest. I've took pedals off my pedal board before because I've run the wires in a way that I didn't like, and even though it's on my board, sounds great. I knew the wires when, like, I can cable tie them properly together and what have you. Like years ago, my pedals were horrific years ago. I've just got the 3rd pedal I built back, and I can't even look inside it because it's like a car crash. But now I'm more aware to that sort of thing, so that makes a difference to me. And if I take the back off something like a Reeves electro pedal, you better believe that I'm happy about playing that because the way it looks, it's just that's a fact.
I think that's a point that's lost a lot, is because even if it's psychosomatic, even if there is literally no difference in tone, if you as the player feel different about it, that's the difference. And it makes a big impact, as you said, on how you perform and stuff.
Back up there by Budget Pedal Chap. So if he's saying about cheap pedals and feeling good about how you play, then it's going to be true. Definitely. Yeah. And so next on the circuit list, if I get where do you want to go next on the circuit? We've got the tone section.
This next op amp. So, tone section. So that low pass filter and that second half of dual op amp. Yeah.
Do you know, I might actually get slick at putting this stuff up one day. Maybe. I wouldn't hold your breath, but there you go. So
cool. Yeah, so because that was my big thing at the off of this, is that R9 is a weird one where it's very rarely used. So I've not seen a proper production Tubescreamer with R9 in. That's not to say there aren't any. I'm sure there is. and I understand why it's there, because it's like on the it's like on the first op amp stage where you've got a resistor from the non-inverting input to VREF. So I get why it's there, because it's supposed to help bias it, but you can take it out, it doesn't make a difference. And most tube screamers you play, production ones, won't have it in. The big thing.
Can you feel any difference? Sorry, mate. Can you feel any difference when you're playing, or you've built them either way? Is there any?
I've never noticed. So I've literally know what you do it left, like on a breadboard kind of thing. You're just pulling it in and out, and it's like there is no difference. The part of that might be because, especially when I built them myself, I have a tendency to make C5 go to VREF as well, rather than ground. So it might be that that's helping, but I've not noticed a difference with what on it R9 on here. Oh yeah, I've not noticed a difference. Oh, this is it. Where's two R11s as well?
Oh yeah, there is.
Yeah.
You know what? I didn't even notice any of this. I've read this article that I pulled these from on Electro Smash like a million times.
No, the article's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. They're completely right with everything. But yeah, it just made me chuckle that they've accidentally done that. And I was really surprised that R9, because they've got a value earlier on. So on the TS10, there is a resistor between C2 and the non-inverting input on that clipping stage, and it's 220 ohms. And everybody says, no, sorry, not everybody. Tubescreamer fans claim that resistor is what makes the big difference in the tone.
That's why it's £500 a pedal. It's a real nice resistor.
Yeah, I won't tell you how much I spent on Tubescreamers because it's a lot. But I have a TS10 and it does sound great. I'm not going to say it doesn't sound great. It sounds great.
Have you got a Tamora mod? I don't want to black at you and go one more, but I just got one of them Tamora mod Tubescreamers. Have you seen them? So he's the guy who invented it, didn't he? So I bought one of them. Oh, yeah. There you go.
This was the Apex one that Tamara Sam built with Max on as like if he was going to build a Tubescreamer, how would he build it now? Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Just
man, I got to hear that.
So I got my first Strat at Christmas this year, just gone. I'm not a Strat guy. I hate them. Hate the way they feel. I love the way they look and I love the way they sound, but I hate the dimensions of it. Anyway, for guitar shows, I bought one, and then I got on like this big Strat kick. So I bought a Tamora mod Tubescreamer for no other reason than just I've got a Strat now, so I've got to have a Tubescreamer.
When you get the box, you're going to be glad you got a Strat.
Mate, honestly, I love this. It's a hardtail. It's a 77 hardtail, and it weighs like just under £7. It's amazing. I love the big headstock as well. You know,
has it got the Hendrix 3-bolt neck?
Yeah, it's got the 3-bolt neck, and there's a massive gap between the body and the neck. You know, it's a 70s Strat.
Oh yeah,
but it is like
I'm very familiar with those.
I can't remember like a proper hardtail, like actual Fender Strat that I've seen, because I've got like a Hondo one which is hardtail, but yeah, I don't think I can actually picture a Fender or even Squire with a hardtail.
Yeah, this thing is, the thing is, it's beat up. It's like half the paint is missing. I mean, there's still that clear lacquer underneath the paint, which is so annoying. But to me, the neck is like all worn down and stuff. And I thought if someone's going to play a poly Strat that hard that the paint comes off, it's got to be a good one.
Yeah. I think John's on his way to show us his Strat.
All right. So this is my homage
to
SRV.
Look at that.
This is a 1963 mahogany body that somebody had given to them, and it sat in their garage. It was in that shape. Looks like it's been through every garage band, punk band. Somebody routed it out for humbuckers. I mean, but you can see. The question is,
do you play it with a mid-heavy overdrive and a touch of reverb for the perfect tone?
Well, I play it
thank you, Peter,
cranked to 11.
I
play it cranked up to 11. But
I thought you said a fractal 11, and I nearly fell off my chair.
But yeah, I basically like hybridized it. I took a really cool Japanese Squire Strat neck from the 80s that had the exact radius. I mean, it's almost like a direct reproduction of a 60s neck radius. And so use the Japanese pickups and some Goto tuners, and so it's a true Frankenstrat. But
it's a beauty, that, like, I love the body.
But yeah, when you said it was all
We've now
beat
ended
up,
up,
I
yeah,
was
we've
like,
now ended up on
that's
strats because this
Oh,
is
here
oh
we
yes,
so
go.
this
yes,
isn't
that's a
now.
good
This
one.
died, but this was my main guitar for a long time. This is a uh, Legend by Aria, Japan market, mid 90s. Uh, so it's
It's
really hard
very
to
Billy
see,
Joe
but
Armstrong.
Oh yeah,
yeah. But the thing was, this was my main guitar for a long time, and then the um, truss rod. What's the word? The way when you overdo a screw and it loses, it's like threaded. There we
Oh,
go.
yeah.
So I couldn't. The neck died, so I've got the neck on my wall now, and I've got a replacement neck which doesn't feel as good, so I don't play it. But yeah, there is something about a beat up Strat that just feels like
Absolutely.
that's what a Strat should be almost.
yeah. Unfortunately, the Aria truss rod design was really weak. They had that problem a lot. I've been a professional luthier for about 30 years now, so I've seen everything you can imagine, and as far as failures and just bad repairs and like people over tightening things or tightening it
Yeah.
the wrong way on dual adjustment truss rods and actually putting such a up bow under their neck that the truss rod popped out the back. So yeah, if it can be done, I've seen it.
Well, my Strat, I got it fairly cheap because someone had put a brand new custom shop pickguard on it. So it's like this beat up 70s Strat that like looked like it'd been through the ringer with a brand spanking new. It was horrific. I ended up putting some Radio Shop crisp up 53 pickups in it. Brilliant. And it just come alive in the last Brighton guitar show. My father-in-law nearly sold it probably 5 times. That Strat, people kept coming up to him saying, "Strat for sale, mate." He was like, "Yeah." It's like, whoa, no. And he's like, he's from London, so he's a bit of a Cockney wide boy. He's like, "We can do a deal," all this. Like, absolutely not. If you're watching, cheers, Glenn. Strat is not for sale.
Shall we go back to the tone stack? Because there's a lot
Yeah,
here
we sidetracked.
to deconstruct. We got sidetracked by Strat, which is easily done. Yeah. So there's a couple of interesting things here. The big thing that gets overlooked a lot is the actual tone pot. So the taper for the tone pot, depending where you are in the world, is either G taper or W taper, which is the first half of it is logarithmic and the second half is reverse logarithmic, which sounds redundant, it sounds silly, but that's because that's not how it's meant to be thought of. It's meant to be thought of like a mixing desk EQ where center is nothing and then it's reverse log out from both sides. So center is no EQ, and then as you turn it left, it's reverse log, and if you turn it right, it's also reverse log from center. So that's why it's that taper.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, and this is one of the downfalls of a lot of like the Joyo, Mosky, like every cheap Tubescreamer clone does it. And again, as builders, we've all done it at some point. I guarantee we've tried using a linear pot. And the problem is, as you turn it, nothing happens. And then the very last bit, all of a sudden, becomes really bright or really dark.
Mm-hmm.
We've probably all had it where we've built it for someone and someone's gone, I think the tone pot is broken. It doesn't change until the very end.
And we've all put a 50k in there and then tried to use 2 resistors to create our own taper.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Yeah,
because we've got nothing left in a drawer.
Yeah, so the W20K is the correct part. As I said, it's reverse log out from the center, and that gives you the perfect sweep. And this is the big thing again. If you try like an Ibanez or a Maxon Tubescreamer, and then you try and compare it to a Joyo just stock, the Joyo feels very different because the EQ, the tone pot sweep is so different. So it's almost impossible to compare in terms of that. But, and again, this is what I've talked about with the simple Screamer. Before we go to that. So the other part of this tone pot equation is R7 and C6. So R7 and C5, sorry, the 220 NF to ground. That forms a fixed low pass filter. So that is permanently cutting the signal at 720 hertz. And then the pot is sweeping between being like a gain filter, so C6 and R8. So it's sweeping between that, which is a very bright boost, and the other end is just that cut. So with that in mind, if you can't get hold of a 20k pot and don't want to try hacking it, one of the easiest things to do is either make R7 smaller or make C5 smaller. And suddenly it'll be much brighter because you're reducing the amount of fixed cut that's permanently there. It's those two things in combination that give you that kind of mid hump. You've got the permanently fixed treble cut, and then you kind of try and boost it back up with the op amp stage. But that's what creates that mid hump. And this is why I say, when for me, it's not a tube screamer if it doesn't have those two stages. So things like I've had arguments with people about the Timmy. The Timmy gets called and yet another tube screamer all the time, and I disagree because
It's
it
so
doesn't
different.
have this. Well,
Yeah.
it is and it isn't, but it is basically missing the connection between that little red dot between C5 and one of the outside wipers of the tone control. It's missing that connection, and it's that connection which is what forces that mid hump. So yeah, as I said, the very easy mod would be to replace either R7 or C5 with something smaller, and that makes it instantly brighter, instantly more usable. The tone pop will still feel like crap if it's just linear, but it will be better. Yeah, that's the main thing, really.
So
People can see me making notes all the way through this. Like, I'm trying that. I'm
doing
trying
the same
that.
thing. I've got a pencil and a pad right in front of me, and I'm like constantly writing down all these places. Yeah.
I will tell you the values I use. So I made a pedal called the Simple Screamer, which was a tube screamer that was only used normal values, and sounded great. So I replaced R7 with 4K7 and C5 with 47K. Now again, sorry, it's 47 NF. So again, this is just simple maths. If you double R7, you half C5, you get 2K2 and 100. Double it again, so double 2K2, you get 4K4, and half C6 again, you get 40 over 50. So 4K7 and 47 gives you the same low pass filter with normal values that work great. And then to sort the tone control with 47, if R7 is 4K7, R11 at 1K doesn't do the job. It's acting exactly on that first gain stage where the maths is done R1, so yeah, R11 over R8 when it pops that way, or nothing the other way. Anyway, R11, the 1K in the feedback loop, if you make that 4K7 and make R7 4K7, suddenly it becomes much brighter. And then you can use a 1K linear pop for tone control, and it works perfectly. Gives you a really nice sweep. Everything's fine.
Really?
None of this bunching. Yeah. So my values for this are R7's 4K7, C5's 47N, R11's 4K7, and then again I do the same maths with this. So R8 becomes 1K, and C6 becomes 47, and you get the same exact thing using normal values. 1K linear tone pop works perfectly because the maths is right.
Okay.
I'll
try that. Yeah, because
I'm literally just about to do a little run of SRV mod tube screamers, so I'm definitely going to have a look at that. Although I have got some nice 1K resistors.
Yeah, I shared the so I shared my layout for the Omega Screamer a while ago, which is my simple screamer made using fancy components, and I shared the schematic. So I'll send it across, and again you can do what you want with it. Cool. But as I said, all the values are either 1K, 4K7, or 10K. All the pots are like 1K linear tone, so it's all kind of normalish stuff. Again, whatever op amp you want to use, the transistors just standard BJT, and it's all just none of coupling caps. Because that's it. Again, I feel like every pedal builder at some point early on in their pedal building journey has wanted to build a tube screamer. It looks like an easy pedal. As John said, it's ubiquitous with every, guitar and tube screamers are going hand in hand. And everyone tries to build a tube screamer. And if you build it from a kit, it's fine. But if you're trying to build it yourself, they're daft parts. Like 220 ohm resistor isn't a standard part, really. The WK taper, you're not going to find. 51K and 510K aren't. So you're going to have to adapt. So I figured if I could find a way to make it using off the shelf, you buy those kits with like 10 of each value resistor. I wanted to build something where I could guarantee you could buy one of those and every component will be in there, and you won't have to mess around with trying to find a W20K pot for a tenner from Germany or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've got bags and bags of old components that I go through, test each one. You know, some of them have drifted. Oh, look, that one's drifted to where I'm at. Good.
Yeah.
That takes some time. So that'll be handy, actually. Yeah. I've got a question in the chat here. It's not about a Tubescreamer, but what do we think about this? How do you feel about adding a treble bypass to the volume of a fuzz face circuit?
So the bypass cap.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I mess about with everything on a fuzz face. There's that little components in there that I make everything switchable. You could probably go back through my Instagram feed and see every different mod that you can dream of on there. And of course, the input cap's gonna have a massive thing. So that 100K resistor is also mentioned. I'm speaking to you like you've seen his post. Here we go. No, that one. Yeah, so the 100K resistor, if you lower that, you're going to get more cleanup. But if you're saying you want to add in like a treble bypass, as in to take treble away, you would probably want to lower your input cap as well, because the 2 UF input cap.
Or is it or does he mean like in the Hendrix fuzz face where you've got a cap across that 100K?
Oh, right, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
like I said, I've put diodes in there and all sorts with a cap going the other way as well, and you can mess with that massively.
I mean, you see, Vex has built a career off of it. So,
oh yeah. Do you know what I said this before?
I say it sounds me, but
I mean, it's true though. You can, you really can.
I built that thing with all the knobs. I couldn't get it. It was one of the first pedals I ever built. It was like it's broke, threw it away, and then I bought the real one. And it's like, hang on a minute, it sounds the same.
It's very much a pedal for you have to know what a fuzz face is and what almost like what the circuit is back to back like in your head. So you have to picture what those 5 knobs do and how they're going to interact.
Brian, on your fuzz face, there's a 460 or 430 ohm resistor right at the end of the pedal. It's tied to the output. If you change that to a 1K, you'll never get a volume drop. There's always an increase. It's the first mod I do on any single fuzz face. And if it's dark, the input cap on this circuit makes a huge difference.
Big difference.
Massive. I built one recently with a 10NF and a 2.2 UF on a pot, a 50K pot. Put them on the outside wipers. Center comes from your input, and then you can have a tone control. Brilliant. And it makes a massive difference. But that 1K resistor, 100% the first finger change on a fuzz face. Who wants to step on a gain pedal and get quieter? No one.
What would be the first thing, if anything, to mod other than, like you said, removing like non-useful components, Simon? Like if somebody wanted to like do a mod to say an existing Tubescreamer that they had, what would be like one of the first areas you would look at, like say a clone or like maybe one of the less desirable models that they want to make into a more useful sound?
I think Joe and I have probably talked about this before as well. We've both done Vintage Overdrive by Joe. It's a great, on its own, it is a great pedal. And even as like, there was a point where I owned more Tubescreamers than cutlery, and then my partner got bought a set of cutlery for a birthday and ruined that joke. But there's something, the Joe sounds great on its own, but it's also wonderful platform for modding. It depends what people want from it, honestly. So if you play a Tubescreamer, so I hated the Tubescreamer. Again, I've been very open about this. I hated this Tubescreamer for the majority of my life. I just didn't get it. It was nasal. It sounded bad on its own. The gain was weird, and it wasn't. When I was a child, I became obsessed with ancient Egypt, and I became obsessed with king cobras, and I loved it. I researched king cobras, became so fascinated. And in doing so, I ended up becoming terrified of snakes because I became so aware of what they were and how dangerous they were. I gave myself a mortal fear of snakes. And with the Tubescreamer, it's done the opposite, where I hated it, really hated it. And so I wanted to understand why. So I bought the Joyo, and I think I bought a Muskie and started playing around. And basically, with doing that, I've ended up loving them. So that's how I've gone. And it's, if you want to do a simple mod to a Tubescreamer, you have to think what you want from it. The one I feel like the request most people ask is, how do I get more bass out of it? And it's a fascinating one because unlike transistor circuits where the input cap, especially like you're saying with the fuzz face, that input cap makes all the difference to the amount of low end. The Tubescreamer is less fussy. So like C1 on a Tubescreamer, the input capacitor is 22 N. The OD808, the Maxon version, is 1 UF. And they sound identical because those input caps are much more about preventing kind of leakage, like DC leakage, than anything else. And the big thing comes around, if we go back to the game, I don't know how easy it is to go back to the game stage.
For someone who can do this, it's probably really easy. But for me, we might not get there. Let's have a look. How's about this? Look, I'll share the whole circuit.
Yep.
How's that? Can you see that?
Okay. Kind of. Basically, C3, and I think it is C3. Like, I copied it down off this.
The 47 NF.
That's the one. That 47, as I said, a C3.5 will make what I call the gain filter. There's probably a better word for it, like an official word for it. But basically, that adjusts both the amount of bass and the amount of gain. So C3 is more responsible for the amount of bass than the input cap is in this circuit. So if you want more bass, make C3 bigger. Start with, in the 80s, there was the Hot Rod mod, and that used to make that 220 NF. And that filled up the low end. So
I like 474 too. Like I like even going higher, 474, and that's what's in my bass Tubescreamer that I built, and I like it with guitar too. It sounds great with guitar.
So this is one of my favorite Tubescreamers. This is the Free the Tone, previously Providence SOV2, wonderful pedal. The gain filter on that is 470 NF. But it doesn't on that. It doesn't feel quite the same. But yeah, making that, if you want more bass, make that bigger. As I said, that's usually the most common mod that people ask for, is how do I get more bass out of this? If you want it louder, diodes really. If you want it to be louder, change the clipping diodes.
Cut them out.
That's right. Say again.
Cut them out.
Yeah. If you want to be way louder, completely just dip them out.
Just lift them. Yeah.
Cleaner, brighter. Everything that I want in the Tubescreamer.
Well, again, that's it. So it depends, like we said at the start, with who we associate Tubescreamers with. All of those players use them in such different ways that it's modifying it. I feel like if you modded one for John Mayer, modded one for whoever else, the mods they would want to be different. I think the no diodes is wonderful if you're playing a tube amp and you can really use the Tubescreamer to smash a tube amp. Because you've got all the volume, as you said, it's really bright, the bass doesn't feel congested. It's wonderful. But if you're like a kid that plays in local bars and you need low volume, you can't crank your amp, but you want that mid lift, having those, that's why those diodes are there, is so you can get a bit of distortion without having to dime your amp.
Here's a good one from James Silver. Hi guys, what are the strangest or most extreme mods you've been asked to do? Well, there's a question. My favorite is artists, or I'd like to, it's not even famous artists, just people who are that way inclined tend to describe mods with like colors or objects, like, oh, I need it to sound a bit more brown. Okay, so I'm thinking more lower mid, more lower mids. So then I'll increase the lower mids. And that's the weirdness I find. I don't really find any weird requests, as in like, I've built a pedal out of a gas mask before at someone's request, but I don't know if that's a weird mod.
I think one of the big things is, and I completely understand it, is people requesting things that they want but aren't practical for numerous reasons. So say it's making things foot switchable. That's the big thing. So I get asked, can you make this foot switchable, or can you make that foot switchable? And 9 out of 10 times you can, but it's going to make such an impact on the output volume that it's not going to work how you think it is. I've been asked before, can I have a pot that controls So as I turn it up, the volume goes up, but the gain comes down, or vice versa. So as I turn the gain up, the volume comes down, so it stays the same. And the answer is no, because again, it's logarithmic. It's never going to be a really smooth as gain increases, volume decreases. The Tubescreamer is a great example of that. If you max the gain on a Tubescreamer, and then turn it down, turn the gain almost off, the volume doesn't change that much. It changes a bit, but not that much. So there's a lot of people that I completely understand why they've asked that, because it would be a wonderful feature. That's a really cool feature. If you could have like a wah pedal kind of thing where as you tilt it forward, the gain goes up, but the volume doesn't change. Cool. Yeah. I love the idea, but it's really difficult to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
I definitely, and another thing I've been asked for as well, which isn't really out there, but is changing the order of pedals on a switch. So, for example, sometimes great thing, Tubescreamer, Clon, you want to change it around, probably sound amazing. But I've been asked for like things, Fuzz Face and a Range Master. Like you want the
put
Fuzz
them out
Face
of order.
First,
you want it, you want to keep it there.
You don't want it to be like, but and then when I've said the pedal out, they've gone, well, actually, that switch is useless. But it's a massive amount of work that you have to pay for to put that switch in.
Put that switch in.
If you want a light to say which side's on, it's even more work. You don't want that in your life.
I'd say one of the weirdest, but one of the coolest that I ever did wasn't on a pedal. It was on a guitar, where we completely set up a series of Jaguar guitars for an artist who uses a bow a lot, and he uses a lot of loopers, and he like has completely different string gauges. Like sometimes you have bass strings in the middle and then going out, and we like had to like extremely arch the nut, extremely arch everything so that he could get, single string bowing. But when it was done, I mean, seeing it, but it was a real challenge, like all the physics involved, because he still wanted to be able to fret notes too. So I had to like really, I mean, just skate that razor's edge where it was unplayable in one way and not, perfect in the other. And so, but it was cool.
I have trouble setting up just a normal guitar. No, it's interesting what people come up with, because sometimes people have come up with amazing ideas, and I've been like, that's fantastic. I'll reuse that all the time or quite often, but there's never really been anything quite out there. I mean, we both know a guy, Joe Richardson, who's like, he's one of them annoying people that can pick up a guitar and play anything, any style.
I know plenty of people like that.
I mean something jazzy, play jazz. Something slow. No, I mean something like metally. It's like, he's one of them annoying guys, and I can play everything. But he's come up with some. I know me and Simon have, like, he's worked on the pedal, and I've worked on the art on a few of his. And this guy is like the most creative. I mean, he started building pedals for a little bit, and he used to put pickups in the signal path just to see what it'd do. So he sent me a pedal,
like Transformers. Yeah,
I think that's great. I opened one up, and there's a humbucker inside. Like, what? That's the way he thinks. Brilliant.
I forget. There was someone talking about art, and it was that thing about. Okay, I've lost my train of thought there. But it's the expression of don't say it can't be done to the man that's doing it. It's exactly, isn't it? Where if you come up with like, oh, that's what it was. Alfred Hitchcock going on about making Citizen Kane, and he was asked, how do you come up with these great ideas? And he went, ignorance. So I didn't know that I couldn't do that, so I just did it. It was that idea that because he didn't have any rules, he could do anything he wanted. He's like, if I'd been taught the rules first, it would have been terrible, because I would have thought I can't do that, but not knowing and being like, well, why can't I do that? I'm going to do it. I feel like every pedal builder when they start out really wants to do that and throws themselves into that, and it's then I was going to say making your own rules, but it's like finding your path and finding what does and doesn't work, and getting into lots of arguments along the way about it.
Yeah, I mean, I won't build something that I wouldn't want to put out in the world. So, I mean, no matter how good
I've refused a lot of requests because of that. It's like, I can't have my name associated with what you want done to this. Sorry. And
don't get me wrong. If anyone owns one of my earlier pedals, either sell it back to me or throw it in a bin, because it's probably all the otherwise useless. There's some stuff that I did earlier on that definitely isn't representative of my work now as well. And it is another good one. More bass. Stack your TS into a Mojo. Let me tell you, the Mojo, for years I've laughed saying it's just a cheap pedal, because Budget Pedal chap who was in a chat before, he loves this pedal. And he was forever saying it's the best drive in the world. I was like, get lost, whatever. And I modded one for him recently. And my word, are they well built? And my word, do they sound good? Mm-hmm. So I've changed my opinion on a Mojo. I now believe it has Mojo.
Well, especially after you put that giant tropical fish in there.
You've got to. SMD circuit.
Yeah. I'm still not a fan of the Mojo. So again, exactly the same situation. I bought one off the back of Budget Pedal chap constantly going about how amazing it was. And I've tried, man. I can't get on with it. And it's not just, again, this is what we've said before, that, you know, tone really is in the fingers, and every player is so different. The amount of times I've had people come around to try pedals, and they've tried some of my favorite pedals and they've sounded awful. And then they've played pedals which I hate, and suddenly it sounds glorious. And it's, you know, every pedal fits. Is that Ollivander thing of the pedal finds the player kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think the same's true with amps and guitars as well.
I mean,
it's one of them things.
It's why we really get surrounded by so many pedals and so many different types of guitars with different pickup configurations and different amplifier configurations. If you're into this seriously, like I've been for, you know, most of my life, then you have to have it. Like, you need that tone for this song. You know, the tape's rolling, and you can't just, you know, expect to find it by twiddling a bunch of knobs. You know, you can get it with this box, this guitar, this amp, go. It's just, you know, why we have it.
I mean, I think back to my first rig, which I'd still be playing now if I hadn't found that pedal show. It was an orange Tiny Terror with an aftermarket Tubescreamer smashing the front of it, talk about treble in your ear, and a set of EMGs in a limited ESP Les Paul that I bought while I was drunk on deployment. And actually, I woke up in bed with it in Dubai. After the 2 day, honestly, a 2 day bender, I woke up in my bunk on board, which they're not big. So I was like lying there in this guitar. And I woke up, I was like, whose is this? I was like really confused, went in a mess, said to the lads, whose is this guitar? They're like, you bought it 2 days ago, you've been carrying it around. Like, oh shit, that's not true. That's not true. It was like this all black heavy metal ESP. And so I was playing that with a Tiny Terror and a Tubescreamer, and it sounded horrific. And I hated Tubescreamers for the longest time. And it went until I got into my more, what you call it, like blues banger rig, or blues boomer, rig. Look, a Tubescreamer is great. Fantastic. Yeah. And speaking of which, any last thoughts on the actual circuit that we've missed areas? I mean, I've deliberately missed the J bypass switching, to be fair. I don't know.
So, the last bit was just the output buffer. So, again, we were talking about removing coupling caps. So, can you just go to the output buffer if possible, please?
Maybe.
Find out.
That's 2 seconds. I'll get that up.
I say that because I know that the values I've got written down on mine are different because of the 2C11 things.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there were 2C11s in that. The AMZ art, not AMZ, Electro Smash article. So I started having to number them differently afterwards.
Let me see. Output is there. Look at that. It's almost like I'm learning. Problem is, my camera's right in front of the screen, which isn't the most helpful.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So basically, before that, you've got the volume pot, and this is part of it. So this output buffer is exactly what you think it is. But there are a few things to talk about. So between that op-amp stage and here, you've got the volume pot. So you've got 2 caps in series and a resistor as well. 2 coupling caps. And like we were saying, with the SRV mod, the goal is to remove as many of these as possible. So for here, you'd remove C8. And you'd also remove R12 because the level pot essentially becomes R12. When you look at the full schematic, it's an odd one, but the level pot has lug 1 going to VREF rather than ground. And this is part of what makes the SRV mods work. If it went to ground, it wouldn't work. It would. I found out the hard way, as I feel other people have. You can't bias BJT buffers to ground. It has to go to VREF. So having the level pot go to VREF means that that can become R12. You can completely remove C8, and I think C7 is the one before it. And then the level pot becomes the bias control for this. And then we get into this horrible area, which is on here, RB, C9, and RC. And this is where everyone loses their damn mind when they talk about the 808, the TS9, and then even the TS10, what those values should be and how they affect the sound. So, like I was saying earlier, the input, when we talk about Tubescreamers, there is the Son of Screamer that I'm sure we've all seen, which is a bufferless Tubescreamer. So no one bats an eyelid about it. But when you've got the buffers, there's a few things to take into account. So the input buffer, you can argue very easily that it doesn't need to be there. You know, the chances of you plugging a guitar straight into a Tubescreamer these days is non-existent, really. I genuinely can't think of anyone that has the Tubescreamer straight after their guitar, unless they're trying out a Tubescreamer. But on a proper board, it would be later down the chain. So the input buffer, I fully agree. If you want to get rid of it and just go into the op amp, you do you. The output buffer, I think should be there for two reasons. One is it's getting pushed by the rest of the circuit, and it is it's an amplifier stage. It's an amplifier stage with a gain of 1. It's not the volume in is a volume out. The impedance in, yeah, exactly. So it is getting pushed, and this is when we talk about buffers, people think they're mystical or confusing. It's not. They are amplifiers set with 0, so they're not adding any gain, but they are reducing the impedance. The impedance input is going to be different to the impedance output. So that's the first thing. I feel like the output buffer should be there because it's getting pushed by the rest of the circuit and will saturate in some way. It might not fully distort, but like we said, if you remove those flipping diodes, that stage gets absolutely smashed. And suddenly that adds to the saturation, it adds to the thickness, it becomes integral to the sound of the circuit. And the second thing is the output impedance. So when you have just the volume part going straight to the output, the output impedance varies relative to where you have the pot set. So if you had the pot set full, your output impedance is 100k, assuming you use a 100k pot. And if you have it the other way, it's much, much lower. Different pedals, and especially if you're going to an amplifier, they will react differently to the impedance that's hitting them. So having it fixed helps in the long run. So here, the output impedance is set by RC. So the output impedance will always be 10k, no matter how the pots are set, no matter what guitar you put into it. However you're playing, the output impedance after this Tubescreamer will be 10k. So whatever that's going into, it's a nice low impedance to drive long cable. If you just have the pot, it's variable, and 99% of the time that's fine, but there will be those instances where it's not. So the full tone OCD is a great example of that. To make the tone pot work on the OCD, it has to have a 500k volume pot at the end. And sometimes you'll find that if you use the OCD for certain pedals, it acts funny, depending on where the volume pot's set, because it's giving, when it's max, it's giving a 500k output impedance, which is ridiculous, especially, it should be much, much lower. I tend to use, and I can't give a good reason for this other than Providence / Free the Tone do it, and their pedals are incredible. I tend to make that 22k. So the output impedance becomes 22k. Theoretically, 10k is better. It's a nice fixed low impedance that will travel well down long cables. But yeah, I tend to use 22k. And RB, and this is the other argument, is that RB in series. So I think it's like 100 ohm on one, 470 ohm on a different, like the TS808 and the TS9, it varies. Does it make a difference? I don't know. Maybe. I feel like the bigger difference will come from C9 and what kind of capacitor C9 is, especially if it's not polarized. So like on this, it's non-polarized, and that's a big thing. In fact, I think if you go through most of it, most of the coupling caps are non-polarized. The larger ones, I mean. So obviously the smaller
It's
ones won't be polarized.
definitely want to change in the Joyo because they
Yeah.
use polarized electrolytic caps for the signal caps, which is insane.
Yeah.
Well, I recently modified a couple of Tubescreamers for room of tone, and I pulled out a lot of the. I've got one in my hand actually. Is that the right one? No, it's not that one. But yeah, I pulled out a lot of the caps because I was obviously doing these mods, and yeah, in the real thing, none of the coupling caps are polarized. That's how it should be because you don't know which side is going to have the higher. I forgot the word, but yeah. So yeah, that output cap needs to be non-polarized, ideally, and RC I would make 22K. And again, the argument with regards to what the transistor should be or what the actual buffer state should be, there's a good argument for the input being a JFET because it's got a higher input impedance and you can put a guitar straight into it. Realistically, a BJT is probably better because it's then works better depending on what you're putting into it. But I would always argue that the output buffer should be a BJT. It's going to have a lower input coming into it already from the rest of the circuit, and it will play better. And the output impedance.
Do you have a preference? Do you have a preference
for
on
what
the
transistor?
type? Yeah, I mean, do you go for something standard maybe? Or?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan for the output buffer of this. I'm a big fan of just the 2M3904. But there's an article, as the AMZ article about buffers, which if you've not read, is really fascinating. It's worth reading. They talk about with BJT transistors, the higher the gain, the HFE, the closer you get to unity volume. So, I mean, really, I've never heard a difference in terms of, you know, you've got transistors with 100 HFE and like 500 HFE. I've never heard a difference. But I read that, took it quite literally. So I tend to use BC549Cs as input buffers because it's a nice high gain transistor that's easy to get. And then the 3904 as the output buffer, just because it clips nicely. So if you are smashing it, like we said, if you've taken those diodes out or you've put LEDs in or you've put something, so you've got a decent amount of volume coming out the rest of the circuit, having something that can distort quite nicely there is wonderful. So yeah, you can also try like the 2N 2222A would probably work quite nicely there as well.
Yeah, I've seen 5089s used there too.
Yeah,
if you're trying to go for the really high gain option, like you were talking about.
What about something like an MPSA 13 or something like that, like a Darlington transistor? We're talking like magnitudes more gain then.
Yeah.
Not that
again on the input, I think. Yeah, part of it. So yeah, because I had the MPSA. I can't remember what the transistor is. It's whatever the Debbie ever wants, basically. Yeah, and again on the input it will work great, and on the output I'd go for something lower. But yeah, on the output I would use something that you know will sound good distorting. So if you think I would put that transistor in an Electro Boost or in a fuzz face, or not like the ZVEX Woolly Mammoth and things like that. Those kind of transistors, where they're silicon transistors that will sound good clipping. That's what I go for in the output buffer.
And we've actually got a question in the chat for you, Simon. Simon, what's your favourite pedals to go with the Tubescreamer?
So I don't have a tube amp. My amp is a little Hotone 1 watt Mojo Diamond. So I use pedals all the time to emulate that. So my personal favorite is biased because it's one I make, but it's the Warm preamp, which I built to emulate the preamp stage of a tube amp. So it's a JFET mu amp and then with a fixed Fender tone stack. So you get that kind of Fender feel and it clips nicely. So I tend to run anything mid-forward into that. So I'll leave that on and then push it with like a Tubescreamer or the Klon or things like that. If it's in terms of pairing, like if I say I was a real person with a real amp.
I think
you are a real person there, Simon.
Well, I'm not entirely sure.
I'll be honest. After some of them descriptions, I'm starting to question it.
This is true. Yes. I am a mutant too, so I understand.
I feel like if I was going to make a 2-in-1 pedal, I would do Tubescreamer and possibly the Lightspeed.
I think that's where he's going. Timmy. Oh,
Yeah,
that's good.
if I was going to make a 2-in-1,
Ooh,
yeah, either a Timmy or a Lightspeed. Partly because you can then push the two together and that sound great, and they will. Partly because one's transparent, one's mid-4, so you get different flavors.
I've
What about you, John?
I've got a comment on that because a lot of the people I know that are professionals, like session musicians, studio musicians, they run a Tubescreamer into a Tubescreamer. That's their favorite pedal to go with a TS is
Wow.
another TS.
Yeah.
And seriously.
How do they go
Yeah.
about setting them then? Do they set one clean and then like a dirty one pushing it?
Yes, they do. And sometimes they'll reverse which order they put it in, like the stack, which one you have going in first, whether it's clean or dirty. And it's a lot of the solo tones that you hear on the Nashville rock country kind of stuff. Like when you hear them build up and you hear it like go to 11 and they come back down and they haven't really gone back down to full like quiet. And then they go back down to a, you know, that full quiet, but it's still got the drive. It's using two Tubescreamers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm going to answer, and I'm going to say the same answer that I always do.
And don't shoot me, Nashville musicians, because I gave your secret away. I was told not to tell too many people that, and I just told the entire internet.
Someone's going to come and bag him now on a
I know, yeah.
The answer to that question is always, when you say what pedal goes with what, is a range master with everything.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I was talking to a few people the other day actually, in different conversations, and they were saying, I don't get the Tubescreamer, I don't understand how to use the Tubescreamer. And my argument is always, if you picture the Tubescreamer as a range master, it makes more sense. You know, they're both doing similar jobs, they're both cutting the low end, they're both pushing the mids forward. The differences are that obviously the Tubescreamer has a bit more clipping on it and is less fussy about where it goes in the chain. So it's like a slightly more stable range master, but I would treat them and use them in the same way.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If you set a Tubescreamer cleanish and then put a range master with like a full range boost rather than like the regular input cap, that's a sound. It's definitely a sound.
Yeah, it's beefy.
Yeah, if it's not a sound, you better check your connections.
Really? I've done that before. I mean, how many times have you been testing a pedal upside down and put the input to the output and output to the input, and you're like changing component, and then halfway through you go, oh, I see what it is.
You know how many times I went back and like touched up solder pads and like did all kinds of retracing just to find out that I forgot to stick the transistor in the socket.
I do that with I built a delay, and it's got that stupid 16-pin socket, and every single time I'm like, sound. Oh, I haven't put it in every time. It's almost like a ritual now.
It is.
So one more thing, Simon, for this output cap, you say that you use a 10. Do you still use 10 UF and then go non-polar, or did you say you reduced
I normally reduce it to 1 UF. So again, there's an argument, and it's probably in this article as well. It comes up a lot, the idea of it creating a filter that, in this case, C9 would create a filter with RC, and it does, but it's so tiny that as long as C9's a big value, like 1 UF, it's fine. It only becomes a problem if you just try to lower it much lower.
Do you have trouble getting the 1 UFs? Because I know you build on a Vero board, which is the devil, so hard and fiddly, and then also you're renowned for putting them in small enclosures. So do you have trouble putting like the larger volume 1 UF in there non-polar?
Less so now. Well, less so in terms of making small pedals. I use the Chemet. In fact, I've got a board here with them. I use the Chemet 1 UFs, which are always kind of a fixed size and sound cool.
Oh, cool!
They're nice size. I didn't get them anywhere. I think I get them from Farnell, probably. And I use quite a lot of Chemet stuff. That's the other thing, that we all go through those stages of trying different types of capacitors and different circuits to see how they sound. And when I started out, I used Wimmer caps. And in fact, this is an old circuit.
The red ones, Wimmer caps. I remember.
Yeah, Wimmer caps everywhere. And then one of my friends, Tim, who was one of my... I talk about having two pedal gurus. One's called Tim, one's called Ferric. Tim built a box, which was a massive rotary switch, and then all the same value measured, same value caps, and you can either put them in the signal path or put them to ground.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Honestly, I can't. we talk about this all the time, and people are like, they don't make any difference. Use whatever caps you want. You know, if I want to use the cheapest caps in the world, I will. I cannot stress enough how much of a difference it makes.
It does.
It made me fall in love with Vishay, like the old. So Aaron Rodenstein became Vishay. So those kind of blue electrolytic caps made me fall in love with those. Made me realise that Wimmers sound great. But yeah, but those Wimmer caps are scooped, and it sounds weird when I say it, but it's like when I build Tubescreamers and I build it with all the coupling caps. And actually, the Timmy is a great example of that. If you build a Timmy with Wimmer caps, it does not sound good. And that's not to say it sounds bad.
For clarity, we're talking the red Wimmer caps, aren't we? Like
the red Wimmer caps, yeah.
Yeah. Not the ones that were found in the old Cox and Selmers and stuff.
Yeah,
not like these monster. Yeah, these monster Wimmers. Yeah, not that.
They don't.
The new production. Yeah, the new production.
Box caps.
I forget what this is. Yeah. If you put those in a Timmy, it doesn't sound right. If you put those old kind of yellow, like polybox, not polystyrene, but poly something.
Yeah.
Put those in a Timmy, and suddenly it sounds right. And it's the same with Tubescreamer, that if you put those new Wimmer caps in, the mid hump disappears, and it sounds very full in the low end, very bright in the high end, but it doesn't sound like a Tubescreamer anymore. And so it's all those things that make a difference. And people, there will always be people that argue it doesn't. And I will always argue to the death that it does. But if you're building a Tubescreamer, build it with, don't build it with aluminium film in the signal path.
That's it. To ground. Yeah. Do you find to ground? We discussed this last time. To ground, do you find it makes less of a difference? The type of cap,
much
as opposed to a coupling cap or decoupling cap. I'm going to start calling them decoupling now. It's going to confuse me.
Sorry. But caps to ground is less of a difference. Again, the Tubescreamer purists always argue that C5, which is the low pass filter, they always argue that has to be tantalum, as does C6, which is the cap which comes off lug 2 of the tone control. So both 220 NF, and purists always argue they have to be tantalum. And the problem is not new tantalum, vintage tantalum, and it sounds ridiculous.
Oh gosh!
Again,
do you know what tantalum does? You know what tantalum does over time, right? As far as
I'm guessing
it just
the deteriorate massively. That sounds about right. So that's it. It's probably, again, it's like all those vintage pedals where everything is out of spec by the time we've played it now, and this is why they all sound so different. But I imagine people love that tantalum now because it's probably bigger or a bigger value or smaller value.
Yeah,
it's so out of spec that it's changed. But part of Tim's giant box was new tantalum caps and old. He had again Rodenstein solid tantalum caps, and they sounded phenomenal.
I imagine he will have tested them caps first, so they wouldn't have been out of spec. They would have been the same.
No, they were exact. That's what I mean. And it also made me fall in love with paper and oil caps, which I know again Joe is a big fan of those vintage paper and oil. But they're just,
man after my own heart.
There is something about there is something about them that's just glorious. I've got some more coming from the Ukraine, which will arrive when they arrive.
I've ordered from that website too. It takes about 4 weeks. Well, I ordered a fair amount. In fact, it took a bit longer last time because we won't talk about Ukraine because I don't want to drag that talk into it. But
let's just say demand was up for certain components.
I've ordered from them too. At first, I thought I've been stung. I was like, oh god, they're not coming, but they actually did come, and I got lots of them paper and oil things. And that's because the Soviet Union carried on with that technology, as we were saying, John, for much longer. We've been through all of this in the previous episode. We literally, they had to. They carried on with that technology, so they were better at it in the end for longer.
Well, it's like the Germanium transistors as well. That they just there's something about English Germanium and Russian Germanium that are so different, and it seems to be again in how tight the tolerances are. That the Soviet ones seem to hold a much tighter tolerance, whereas the British ones just drift so wildly.
Well, they were banging them out at a rate of knots, weren't they? There's just
Well, that's something that we discovered after the Fuzzrite episode. I built my germanium version with a British-made germanium on one side and a Soviet on the other. The Soviet was the low gain, super low leakage. The British was the high gain, gnarly, all over the place, lots of leakage, and that they're having a Cold War standoff, and the unseen hand that is blending between the two sides of those transistors. That's what's in control of the fuzz war there going on. So it's perfect. Joe said we're going to have to design a double pedal around that concept now.
We've got to.
Yes,
yeah.
A Cold War pedal.
A Cold War pedal.
I feel like I'm going to put this out there now, right at the end of the episode, because I feel like if I put it out in the world, it might happen. I feel like we, between us, need to do a 3-way pedal. I'll come up with the enclosure. I'll leave you both space to work and drill, and I'll make my bit, and I'll send it to probably to Simon first, then to you, John, and maybe we could give it away or raffle it off, or we'll do something with it.
Do something cool.
I feel like a 3-way pedal. That sounds like a plan.
I've got the vault of all the vintage Mojo components, so we can find really special ICs or whatever we need. I mean, I'm gonna blow your mind with some of the things that I pull out of the piles of stuff that I just moved from my house. As I'm sorting through things, I'm finding stuff. I'm like, I forgot I had this. I mean,
I'm moving workshop at the minute. Well, I'm moving workshop soon. I started packing some stuff away, and I'm blowing my own mind. I'm like, my God, look at this OC81D white jacket. I didn't know I had that. And I'm like, where have these been hiding? The same. Well, with all that in mind, this is now the end of the Tubescreamer episode. Thank you for everyone who's been in the chat. Massive thank yous to Simon for blowing my mind with that one. I wish I'd never filmed the video that I'm going to put out in 2 weeks. You've already made it and obsolete. Cheers for that. So from Hello Sailor Joe, it's a goodbye from me.
And from John Mulholland Space Wolf, goodbye from me.
And Simon from JSA, goodbye.
See you later. Cheers.